Hi everyone! Today I'm continuing the series on comparing and contrasting different MBTI types that might sometimes look alike, and namely I'm going to talk about the difference between ISTP and INTJ, because sometimes these types are confused. They might express a certain, let's say, similar kind of energy. And I think it's quite important to actually look at the differences in cognitive functions as well as temperament between these two types. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And just before I dig deeper into the explanation, I would like to remind you guys that I also offer coaching sessions, personal development sessions, aimed at helping you gain a better understanding of yourself and your future vision and plans. More details about the kinds of coaching processes or sessions that I offer, you can find in the link in the description below. You'll find more information about the kinds of tools that I work with, stuff such as MBTI and Enneagram, but also things such as communication styles, public speaking, attachment styles, relationships, career, and so on and so forth. So feel free to check out the link in the description below. Anyway, let's get back to business. I was mentioning that ISTPs and INTJs are types that can actually appear to be very similar. And why? Well, they're both thinkers, they're both introverts, and they have the same interaction style. If we look at Linda Burns's theory, both ISTPs and INTJs are finishers or chart the course types, which means that sometimes the way they communicate and the way they deal with people and situations can be relatively similar. But there are notable differences, and it's extremely important to discuss about them. So let's start with the dichotomy between thinking and feeling, and how these types use thinking and feeling in a different way. ISTPs have introverted thinking and extroverted feeling, whereas INTJs have extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. So this actually creates a pretty big difference between the types, even though at first glance it might not be so obvious. Once you talk a little bit to them and you spend some time with them, you actually see that this is quite different. So let's look at TI versus TE, introverted thinking, extroverted thinking. ISTPs are basically one of the types that have introverted thinking as their most developed function. We also call it the hero function, the first one in their stack. And this basically means that ISTPs, when it comes to their logical processing, they are much more likely to engage in a very subjective process of categorizing data or categorizing logical information. I really like the way Jung was describing this function in psychological types. He said something along the lines of, this type of thinking creates theories for their own sake and sometimes goes into mere imagery, which I think is an interesting description. Some people argue that Jung was biased when describing this function because he was mainly referring to INTPs, but I think there's a notable point here. While ISTPs might not be as theoretical as INTPs, with their dominant usage of TI, they will still be very much interested in creating theories, in gathering as much understanding, knowledge, information, logical points of view, logical perspectives about something, and kind of classifying them into a theory that contains different types of categories or contains a big system that is explanatory of many different types of things or many different types of processes. I made a video in the past about TI versus TE, and I was saying there that the way I imagine TI is literally this. I have a puzzle in my mind. I already have this logical explanation of how something works, what are the main principles that something is based on. And I'm quite careful with the kind of information that I let in, as in I want people to give me more information, more facts, more points of view, more explanations, more data, more statistical analysis. But I'm going to be very careful with how I let those things be immersed into this puzzle that I have going on in my mind. I'm going to be very careful with whether I accept or reject a piece of information. So oftentimes ISTPs will actually spend quite a lot of time analyzing something that they find out. They are more prone to do a lot of research or to think a lot about something, look at the pros and cons, and sometimes get too stuck in analysis. before they decide that they actually want to move forward with that piece of information, or whether they consider that it's false, right? On the other hand, INTJs have extraverted thinking, and this is their secondary function, auxiliary function, or parent function, according to different systems or theories. And a notable difference here is that TJs especially, and types who have a preference for extroverted thinking, are much more likely to want to be efficient with the way that they use this kind of information. So in Dario Nardi's book, Neuroscience of Personality, he basically says that TJs, INTJs included, are some of the best types at using brain energy in an efficient way and not wasting it, which I believe might be an explanation as to why TJ types are often perceived to be very efficient and very like workaholic, because they don't seem to waste so much of their brain energy on tasks and decisions. So contrary to the ISTP, INTJs are more likely to say, okay, I'm going to look for a credible source of information, because this means that it's more likely that that information is true or correct or whatever. I'm going to talk to an expert, or I'm going to read a book from an expert, or I'm going to look at a piece of research from an expert. And because of that, the INTJ will not spend so much time, not always of course, but generally will not spend so much time trying to understand all of these things like the ISTP might do, but might rather say, okay, thanks for providing me with that input. I trust you because you're a reliable source, and now I actually want to do something with this information, or I want to do something with the facts that I came across. I want to apply it. I want to make steps forward. I want to make progress. I want to use it in a way that is helpful for other people as well. And again, if I'm to go back at Carl Jung, he was describing this function as a ruling principle that is applied not only for oneself, but also for the other people. And this is why TJs are often quite good at finding, a principle or a conclusion that seems to be easier to measure, seems to be easier to operationalize, seems to be easier to apply by a larger group of people. So this is a pretty notable difference in the way ISTPs and INTJs use this function. Now, it's not, that these types are 100% black or white, because sometimes ISTPs will also want to just take the facts and move forward and might not want to spend so much time analyzing something or trying to figure out whether the information is accurate or not. And sometimes INTJs will actually spend a lot of time doing research or trying to analyze something. I'm just saying that if you pay attention to the way they act in their most natural tendencies, this is a pretty notable difference that you'll find. INTJs might actually complain to others like, why are you not moving faster? Why are you stuck in analysis paralysis? Let's do something with it. Let's try it out. Let's implement it. Let's operationalize it. Whereas ISTPs will be action-oriented, but in a different way. And this is where the sensing function comes into play. But before I talk about that, I also want to look at the feeling function. So ISTPs have extroverted feeling, whereas INTJs have introverted feeling. Now, of course, they're not feelers, so this will not be the most obvious function in their stack. However, it's still there and it's still important to acknowledge. So ISTPs have extroverted feeling as their inferior function, which means that it's something that they aspire towards. It's something that is important for their self-growth, self-development, but it's also a point of insecurity. I have often noticed that both ISTPs and INTPs crave intimacy and connection. They crave being able to express their emotions in a way that helps them connect with other people. They can be quite perceptive of how other people feel, more perceptive than the INTJ, but sometimes they might not know what to do with that information. I think actually ISTPs can be exceptionally good at perceiving how other people feel by using both extroverted sensing, which is their parent function, and extroverted feeling, which is their inferior function. Using these functions at the same time, they become very perceptive of facial expressions, body language, things like that, that might give away how someone feels about something. And then, of course, using the extroverted feeling to connect to that emotional experience and make sense of it. And they are perceptive, they notice, they can read the room quite well, but sometimes they become very insecure about what to do with that information, how they're supposed to act on it, how they're supposed to comfort someone or be there for them or something like that. And they might feel like, okay, this is kind of awkward for me. I don't really know what to do about it. It's not my natural kind of thing. But as I've noticed in ISTPs that I know, and as other people have also told me about ISTP significant others or family members, they can be really warm, not like the stereotype that is often portrayed in memes and on social media. ISTPs can be very warm and kind and cute, especially when they are in a close, intimate relationship with someone. Now, INTJs have introverted feeling as their child function or tertiary function, which means that it's actually quite an important function to them. And with their introverted feeling, they will be quite aware of what they value and how they feel about things and what is the emotional relevance of something onto them. And they will be much better at that than connecting with what other people feel. They might highly rationalize how other people feel. Their SE will give them a little bit of input into that, a little bit of, idea of facial expressions and gestures and things like that. And their NI, introverted intuition, might kind of connect the dots. But when it comes to the actual emotional input from that kind of interaction or conversations, INTJs might struggle to actually make sense of it and have a pretty weird interpretation of how someone feels or what the emotional atmosphere is in a specific situation. So with their introverted feeling, they will be much better than the ISTP at connecting with their inner truth, with what they really feel about something and what they really value and what is the emotional impression that they have of something. Whereas ISTPs will kind of struggle with that, since introverted feeling is their demon function. They will not be particularly good at really knowing how they feel about something. It's kind of funny, if you will ask them how they feel about something, they will give you a pretty rational description of it. Like, they will rationalize their emotions or rationalize their opinions, trying to see if that makes sense. And they struggle with accessing the real emotional input there. Whereas INTJs are better at that, and they're more connected with this function. Okay, and then I also want to talk to you a little bit about the differences in temperaments, which I'm careful about, because ISTPs are artisans, like all the other SP types, whereas INTJs are intellectuals or rationals, like the other NT types. And according to David Kersey, this creates a notable difference, but sometimes I think ISTPs can be quite tricky with this category, because I would say a lot of ISTPs will find themselves in the description of the rationals. In my opinion, it's a little bit simplistic and it needs a little bit more depth, because yes, ISTPs do have extroverted sensing, and yes, they are good at being improvisational, they are good at reading the room, they are practical and concrete, they are very realistic. But at the same time, I'm sure that a lot of ISTPs will say, well, there's a lot in the rational descriptions that I can relate to. Things like, wanting to understand things from a very rational point of view, spending time with abstract theories, and kind of thinking about solutions that could be implemented to improve real-life problems. Because introverted thinking and then introverted intuition as their child function coming together can actually help them become highly intellectual or rational, very much interested in rational solutions to problems, but also from an abstract perspective, not just from a concrete perspective. INTJs, I would say, often do find themselves in the description of the intellectuals or rationals, and they might not really find themselves in the description of the artisans. I feel like it's much less likely for that to be the case. So more often, ISTPs are likely to mistype as INTJs or INTPs, whereas INTJs are less likely to mistype as ISTPs. This is a pattern that I've picked up on. Again, I'm not saying that, it's always like this and this is a rule. I'm just saying that this seems to be kind of like a trend. Okay, so these are my thoughts on the main descriptions and differences between ISTPs and INTJs, cognitive functions as well as temperaments. So, what else have you picked up on? What else do you think is important to mention when it comes to the differentiation between these two types? Feel free to share your thoughts below. And as always, thanks a lot for watching, thanks a lot for being with me, and see you next week with another video on typology.